This is King Philip's Regional Review. Today I'm joined by our principals, Dr. Lisa Mobley, principal of the high school, and Michelle Kreuzer, principal of our middle school. Welcome to you both.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Those of you in the community may have become familiar with Dr. Mobley. Dr. Mobley's been the principal at the high school for a number of years now and worked at the middle school before that. But you may not have had a chance to meet Ms. Kreuzer. She's been working at the middle school for almost a year now, and it's been an interesting year, I'm sure. And so I want to start today by having Ms. Kreuzer introduce herself to us so that you can get to know her a little bit. And so welcome, Michelle, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what brought you here to King Philip.
Sure. My name is Michelle Kreuzer, and I started off as a math teacher, a high school math teacher, and spent time in the classroom with mathematics, then went to become a vice principal at the high school level, and then followed by a K through 12 mathematics curriculum director, all with Milton Public Schools prior to coming to King Philip. I actually live next door in Walpole. So I've always paid attention to what's going on in King Philip because it's right over the border. And, you know, it's a great school system. So I was drawn to it. I love the middle school level, even though I did not teach at the middle school level. I did a lot of work as a curriculum director with the middle school in my prior district. And you know, when the opportunity opened up to jump over to King Philip, I grabbed onto it, and I love the district. I love the teachers. I love the school system. I love the students. It's been a great experience. A little bit crazy for the last few months, but it's been wonderful leading up to now.
Well, that's great. And we're so pleased to have you with us here in the district, Michelle. Now, not only were you new to the district, but you also started the year with a new assistant principal as well.
Yes, Mr. Alice, yes.
But you had the opportunity to work together in Milton for a little bit, is that correct?
Yeah, we did work 1 year together in Milton. He was at the middle school as the vice principal there for a year. And so we had the chance to work again together here at King Philip, and he's been a great support for us. Absolutely.
Well, once again, we're so pleased to have you here as part of the KP team. And you and Mr. Alice have certainly hit the ground running, and it has been quite a year to be a brand new team working at the middle school. With that being said, there are a lot of reasons why it's been a crazy year, and maybe we can talk a little bit about those. As all of our viewers, I'm sure, are aware at this point, especially by the fact that we're doing this particular show virtually, you know that school is no longer in session, and that the governor has said that social distancing is something that we all need to be following. And we at the schools have been doing our very best to make sure that we have socially distanced, or I should say physically distanced, but not socially distanced. We're still in contact with each other quite frequently and doing a huge amount of work, but just from separate locations. And so a lot has happened over the last month or two, and there have been a lot of changes to the education process. And so I'm going to ask both of our guests to share a little bit about some of the initial reaction and some of the initial things that we had to do when we got the word that our school was going to be closed. And so, Dr. Mobley, perhaps you can share a little bit about some of those initial reactions and the things that happened at the school.
So I think that you probably said it best, Mr. Zinni, the other day when you sent us all the little icon of building the plane while it was flying in the air. And that's exactly what it has felt like since March 12th, March 13th, that we've been building an airplane while it's flying. The initial reactions for me surrounded a lot of uncertainty. So initially, we really didn't know how serious this would be, if we would be able to come back, and what steps we should take to ensure that our families were safe, that their needs were being met, and that we were still engaging them. So that those became our priorities district-wide, that we take a look at our learning, but the first thing is making sure that our family's basic needs are met. And I think maybe at the middle school, Michelle, you were doing the same thing.
Absolutely. We really were talking about staying connected with each other before worrying about the content. And not that we don't care about the content. I know teachers were panicked about the content that we were not going to get to between now and the end of that time at the end of the year. But when you took a step back from everything, you realize we have to maintain these relationships, and the relationships have to come before thinking about the rigor part and the content part, because it was just such a panicked time. Even leading up to the closure, you could feel it in the school a little bit the last day or so before we had our initial closure date. People were starting to get nervous in the community, just in general and in society. So first coming and calming people down, maintaining a connection with them, that came first. And then we started talking about how do we keep our children engaged? How do we keep them still thinking and learning while they're at home, but still thinking about the relationships first?
And I think the other thing that we have to recognize is the moving target, right? So every few weeks, we've received new guidance from the commissioner or the governor. And I know I'm really proud of this admin team. And Mr. Zinni, you've told us that as well, that we've been able to keep up with the moving target and informing parents, students, and teachers about where we're going. It's one thing to start your summer and plan your school year. You've got your courses lined up, the kids are all plugged into their schedule, you know what you're going to teach, and you're good at it because our teachers, our staff, they're all good at it. But when you have a moving target and you have to adjust every week and a half, and take care of your own families, it doesn't give you enough time to perfect your craft at that point. And so, I think that might take us to now where we're trying to perfect this a little bit.
I think you said it so very well. The first few days when everything was starting to unravel, I know we spent a lot of time on the phone with the Board of Health. We were hearing about the very first confirmed cases in Massachusetts and trying to trace where those occurred and if any of them were in our own county, Norfolk County. And so that was taking up a little bit of our time, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that we were going to see some school closures. And I know at that point we pulled the administrative team together. And so both of our principals who are on the show today were joined with the assistant principals, our special education director, our assistant superintendent, athletic director, director of health and wellness, facilities manager, business manager. All of those people came together, and we tried to look at all of the different moving parts that had to be considered as we were preparing for a school closure. And I think the thing that we did very well was to start to think about the students' basic needs first and our staff's basic needs first. That before we could think about the learning process, we had to make sure our families were safe and well cared for. And so both of you worked very closely on that piece of it as well. And maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the things we did around basic needs. And so maybe you share a little bit about that.
We were just making sure at first that we were thinking about making sure that families had food to eat, because a lot of our families do rely on school lunch or sometimes breakfast as well for sustenance for their children and for the week. So we had to think long and hard if we're not going to have school meeting every day, how are these families going to get food? So working with the local YMCA, working with just the local communities and the food pantries to figure out, is there food in our school that we can help them with? Who are the families that need support? If it's not in terms of picking up food stuff, could we get a gift card, something so they can buy food out to them? So that was one of the first things that came along. Just figuring that out. The other thing is, for even our own staff, making sure that we knew who was going to get paid we want to make sure that our people were being taken care of. So that was a big worry for our staff, communicating that out, because I know that that's a worry for many families. So first, like you said, we were taking care of people. Our people here at King Philip, our teachers and staff, and then also our families as well. Like, what are your basic needs, and making sure that we're meeting them. Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to contribute.
Exactly. Before Lisa, you do go into that, because I do want you to jump in. I do want to point out one thing that Michelle was saying about the food piece of that. And for any of our viewers at home, if you are in fact struggling with food, please know that the food pantries are open. And for our students who are receiving free or reduced lunch, the elementary school in Norton and the elementary school in Plainville are providing free lunches for families, and you can go pick those up. And that information is available on King Philip's website. With that said, I want to jump right back to Dr. Mobley, because Dr. Mobley was a huge part in helping to get technology out. And I know that's another piece of making sure that we got things going early on.
Right. So I think that, along with food, we definitely had to assess the technology needs of our families when they were not in the building. As many of you know, we do have carts and we have technology in the building, but what the students had at home, we had to determine what the need was and then assess our resources and see if we had the resources to lend devices out. But one of the most important things that I think that has crossed my mind is kind of, I'm going to circle back to what I said about the education. It's a moving target, right? So when we first started, as Michelle indicated, the first question was, well, is this closure, does it mean a layoff? Am I still going to be receiving some sort of paycheck? That was on the minds of our families as well. So as this closure has occurred and the restrictions have become stricter on social distancing, families have had a moving target in front of them, where maybe in March everything was fine and they had food and they had heat and they had electricity. Come April, certain families are experiencing job loss, and no longer do they have the wages coming in so that they can put oil in their tank or gas in their car, or hit the supermarket. So the needs of our community has been as much of a moving target as the education of our students. And I think that that's very important for us to recognize and to continue to assess on a continuous basis. But we did give out, I think a couple hundred laptops, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. And also, we're working with families so that they can have access to Wi-Fi. And in the event none of that works, Michelle's been delivering paper packets to middle school families so that they can still be engaged in their learning. And our tech and our grounds director has been delivering laptops, even after the first couple of rounds of laptops. So it's been a team effort.
That's exactly right. And the administrator that I didn't mention in that mix was our technology director, who was sitting with us that very day as well, but became a crucial part of the early stages of the rollout of at-home learning, because we know that some of our families don't have the resources available. And so one of the very first things we needed to do was to put a survey out there to our families to find out who had devices, who had access to Wi-Fi, and what homes were sharing devices. Mm-hmm. Although we were able to accommodate or assist some of our families who had no device whatsoever or no Wi-Fi, it's important to point out to the community that 25 to 30% of our families within the first day of the survey told us that they were sharing devices within their household. And so that became an important part of the discussion about how we would provide learning, knowing that our students didn't have a dedicated device that they could use whenever they needed it. But both you and the assistant principals, both of you and the assistant principals in your buildings were crucial in that early phase to reaching out to families. And maybe you can share a little bit about that, how you checked in with families to find out what those needs were.
So after we had sent out the initial survey and had survey responses, then we cross-referenced it with all our student our enrollment to make sure that we heard from every single family. And then after that, we split up the names from the families that we had not heard from, and we were reaching out by phone to figure out what the situation was in the home, to see what assistance that they may need, and why, the reasons why they might not have filled out the survey. And then from that, we also looked at the list of names that we had filled out the survey that said that they had no access to devices. And we reached out to those families to figure out what the situation is. Is it an issue of Wi-Fi? Is it an issue of not having a Chromebook? Or for some families, just the parent might have a device, but it's a device that's from their work, so they cannot let a child use it. So we were trying to figure out who were the families that needed the devices the most, because, you know, unfortunately, we do have a limited amount of devices that can be loaned out. And we have a lot of families who were sharing or did not have access. So then we set up dates for them to come in to do an initial pickup, and then we continue. Like even this morning, we had a family come and pick up a device. We're still finding some people here and there where maybe a device is no longer working, the device is too slow and not be able to connect with Google Classroom or whatever the teachers are using. We're still maintaining that connection with families to figure out and troubleshoot as we go.
And Dr. Mobley, at the high school level, you teamed
So you broke up for a few
to
minutes.
help you with the distribution of those computers. And in fact, actually showed the mask for you both to wear during the process. So you were there from the beginning to the end, trying to take care of making sure that everyone stayed safe and that the computers got out.
Right, and we followed the same process. At one point, you know, we had 500 reports of, you know, kids not accessing. Now, some of those within that 500, sometimes there were multiple. So it might be little Johnny is not accessing history, science, and math. So he was on the list 3 times. But so when we whittled the list down, it was approximately 350 students that, like the middle school, we had to reach out to on a personal one-to-one basis. And my administrative team, including Mr. Brown, spent the entire weekend making those phone calls in order to make sure that we had at least some sort of contact with every family in the district.
So again, thank you to both for all of that work. And I want to thank the rest of the team who made that all happen. So now that we've hopefully gotten devices out to almost all families and now are getting packets out to a few of them who, in those cases, the devices just won't be a practical solution for them. We are now engaged in at-home learning, distance learning. And I think sometimes people confuse distance learning with a virtual class. And I know at the high school level, Dr. Mobley, a number of our students do actually take virtual classes. Maybe you can take a moment to explain to our viewers what the difference is between distance learning and virtual learning or virtual classes.
Right, and even I think some of the experts out there are shy when saying distance learning. They're really referring to that remote learning, because online learning and distance learning means that there's been a platform created, curriculum created, specifically to be delivered in that fashion. So there are like automatic quizzes and tests and for check-ins that are automatically graded and provide feedback to students. There is sequential curriculum that follows. When you're talking about taking the paper and pencil type of curriculum that our teachers have developed over the years which matches the Massachusetts state standards, and now suddenly saying we have to go online, it's not quite as easy as one thinks. It's not just about a teacher standing up there and lecturing with a board behind them. It's not the same type of learning. Virtual learning and distance learning is very different. So what we've adopted is a remote learning program whereby teachers can communicate with students in multiple ways. It's very interesting because the most recent survey that we put out there, a lot of students and even a lot of families responded that their children aren't comfortable in these video conferencing platforms. And yet some individuals, like students, really love it and engage in it very well. So we're trying to approach remote learning so that all students have access to continuing their engagement and continuing their learning. So that's kind of how we see the difference between remote learning and online learning at the high school.
And at the middle school, Michelle, you're dealing with similar things.
Absolutely. We've mostly concentrated on having asynchronous or not live opportunities for students because it's just very complicated for families right now. We have, as we mentioned, children who are sharing devices at home. So to have something that for us at the middle school that is a mandatory time to log in and have a live teacher teaching, it doesn't work out as well as you might think. Because we just have a lot of things that need to be balanced at home in terms of times and commitments, and we have parents who are out and are working from home, and we have some that are essential workers and are out of the house working. So there's nobody there to monitor the child at home and to encourage them to go on. So we're dealing with these realities right now. So we've mostly stuck with the asynchronous types of opportunities for students, and it might involve voiceover videos. It might involve something like it's called like Flipgrid, where students and teachers can record a video and you can have video feedback to each other. We are also building and including more virtual conferencing type opportunities as we move forward, because we realize now that we're going to have another 7 or 8 weeks of this, we do have to have more opportunities for teachers to connect with their students. We all miss each other very much right now. We're missing that connection. So in terms of those conferencing opportunities, I feel like at the middle school, we're more concentrating on just checking in, making sure you're okay, saying hello, seeing a face, and increasing those opportunities right now, but still maintaining more of those asynchronous learning opportunities for students.
I think you brought up a very good point in that discussion, Michelle, and that's around the asynchronous versus synchronous learning. And I know that's something that we've struggled with at both buildings. And I don't know if people realize that, many of our students have siblings in other buildings. So we may have a high school student who's, say, a sophomore, but also has a 7th grade sibling, and may even have a sibling at the elementary level. And when families are sharing devices, their ability to get all of their students onto a synchronized learning time can be really problematic. They could all need to be on at the same time. And trying to coordinate schedules when the high school's got 7 different classes that students are enrolled in, and the middle school has a full day of classes that those students are enrolled in, then our elementary students are in 3 different towns. The ability to create that schedule just becomes really problematic. And so we've had to move to that asynchronous type of learning opportunity. So as we move forward now, what are some of our next steps? What are the things that we need to be thinking about as we're getting ready to get to the end of the school year, wrapping things up a little bit?
So I think, at the high school, we are taking another sweep at our remote learning plan. And we are looking at, we're taking the feedback that we received from parents, from students, and from faculty, and we're making some adjustments. And I think that those adjustments are going to be very important for kids. I mean, one thing that we heard across the board from all 3 stakeholders is that, scheduling any kind of face-to-face or required time at 8 o'clock in the morning is actually been difficult for our students. Because their clock is changing. So students will see soon that we are now looking to bump that down to 9 o'clock. So we've created this structure that's not a schedule, because it's not mandatory, but we've bumped that start time of that structure down to 9 o'clock. We're also looking at what is our transcript going to look like for kids? How are kids going to be graded? And initially, when we thought that we would be back in school, we thought kids would have an opportunity, to earn typical grades, not grades from a remote learning situation. So we had one plan in place, and we recognized that plan had some pitfalls that, going into it, we didn't see. Again, I think that I don't know that anyone can appreciate that moving target as much as we can right now. But, I think also we're professional, and it's important to us to hear from our stakeholders and to take into consideration what they're telling us. So we've developed a grading policy or grading procedure that is going to take into account all 4 quarters and also ensure that students are treated equitably. And again, that we're going to be rolling that out on Monday. So at the high school, those were our next steps. In addition, we have asked the departments to meet with their department next week and really identify those essential learnings that kids are going to need in order to be successful in their next course. So if I'm in pre-calculus, what am I going to need to be successful in calculus? We're talking about how to deliver some of those essential learnings now, and also what summer learning would look like for the high school. Typically we've scaled back a little bit on summer work in the past few years in order to allow families to really enjoy their time together and take a little bit of a mental break. But in light of this situation, we're looking at what kind of learning opportunities can we provide students over the summer in order to, again, try to ensure that they are ready for that next course. And finally, we're going to need to do some curriculum revisions because we're going to need to do some review and some even new learning with kids in order to ensure that they're successful in the next course. So that's the direction that the high school is going in now. And we have a lot of work ahead of us, but the faculty was definitely up for the challenge today. Definitely.
At the middle school, so some of the things are very similar to what they're working on at the high school. First and foremost, we're just looking for more opportunities to continue to make connections with students. From our feedback from parents and students, we want to increase the number of check-ins that we're doing with students from teacher to student, whether it's through video or through phone, et cetera. So we want to increase that. In terms of the content, not content, but the amount of work that students are receiving for at home, it's been very positive from the families, from both families and from their students, the students, that it's a manageable amount of work right now. So we want to maintain that. But one of the things that we were talking about as a faculty is, as we continue with remote learning, making sure that we're taking student interest and agency into account, because I think there's going to be a level of weariness and fatigue with working with remote learning as we go through the next 7 weeks. So we have to be aware of that, and as we get closer to the end of the school year with the weather warming. So we want to make sure that we are setting realistic expectations for our students and opportunities for extension in the work, and we're reinforcing very important skills that they've learned throughout the school year. So not letting go of the richness and the rigor, but also making sure that we're keeping them interested as we continue this for a lot more weeks. There's a lot more left to this. And then with the teachers, we have been having that conversation. How are we going to make more time or find that time for really urgent material that students need for in the fall? What are we going to do? How is the curriculum going to be adjusted? They're not going to change the state standards, but what are those most important standards and pieces of information that students will need to be successful in their next course? And we might not get to it this spring. So if we're not going to get to it this spring, when is that going to happen? How is that going to fit in and affect the course the next year? So we've begun to have those conversations, and it's tricky, and it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of time and thought, but that's where we are right now in this conversation.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time together. I think there's a lot that we're able to share with the community regarding this rollout of a at-home plan, or this remote learning plan that we've had to put in place for our students to try to make sure that the learning goes on while we're all practicing that social distancing. But as we wrap up our time, I want to thank our guests, Dr. Mobley and Ms. Kreuzer, our principals at the high school and middle school, for talking today about what we're doing with our students and making sure that the learning process continues. I'd like to extend that thank you to all the administrators on the admin team who have been working so hard to put these plans in place, and to all of our staff members who have been working from home to try to make sure that our students are still engaged, are safe, are well cared for, and that are maximizing the learning opportunities that are available to them. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try to make this happen, and we have a lot more work to go as we get ready to open up our schools, hopefully next September, with a healthy and well-engaged group of students excited to come back to a new school year. And so with that being said, I want to thank again our guests. I want to wish all of our families a healthy time together and remind everyone to stay safe. And if there are resources that you need, please go to KP's website. We have all kinds of resources available on the website for families, from accessing food to accessing learning to accessing fuel assistance. It's all there if you need it. And with that, again, good night. And
Good night.
again,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.